Should or will the president end up answering questions by the special counsel? Today's New York Times headline: in Russia inquiry, lawyers tell Trump to refuse Mueller interview. The paper claims that they are concerned, the lawyers, that the president might perjure himself. I asked Congressman Gowdy for his thoughts on the probe.
I think you have a Russia investigation regardless of whether or not there's a dossier. The dossier has nothing to do with the fact that someone tried to hack into the DNC server. Actually, they succeeded in doing so. They tried to hack into lots of other folks' servers. They accessed John Podesta's email. The dossier has nothing to do with the meeting George Papadopoulos had in Great Britain. The dossier has nothing to do with the meeting at Trump Tower. The dossier has nothing to do with allegations of obstruction of justice. I mean, Bob Mueller, who, by the way, didn't volunteer. He was asked to do it after a pretty distinguished career. He was asked to do it, and he's asked to look into what Russia did and with whom, if anyone, did they do it. And I know people focus on the criminality. That's interesting. People find that, you know, much more interesting than something just as boring as did a foreign power try to interfere with our democracy. But I think Bob Mueller, like lots of other responsible people, think that's pretty important too. So he's got a counterintelligence mission, he has a criminal mission, and that criminal mission exists separate. Even if there were no dossier, everything else I just cited still exists. So I think you still have Bob Mueller with or without a dossier.
So what do you say to those who say when we had Watergate or Whitewater, the American public understood the crime that was being investigated? The basic question for a lot of Americans is, what crime is Robert Mueller investigating?
And I would encourage my fellow citizens, that's a great question, and I would encourage them to go back and read the charter, read the jurisdiction that created Bob Mueller. And there's a counterintelligence. What did Russia do to impact our election in 2016? There may or may not be crimes, domestic crimes associated with that, but it's a foreign power trying to interfere with the gears of our democracy. The hack of the DNC server is a crime. The accessing of John Podesta's email is a crime. The attempt to access other servers and emails is a crime. So there is a criminal foundation, if you will, that warrants his existence, but there's a counterintelligence jurisdiction for him separate and apart from any criminality.
Yeah, I don't have the language in front of me, but I read it recently. The way it was set forth is that it's a national security investigation that investigates the period of the election. And I think when people look at where it appears to be going, there seems to be a lot of focus on obstruction of justice. There seems to be a lot of focus on the Trump Tower meeting, for example, and they wonder whether or not this is an investigation of President Trump and his people, or is it an investigation that looks at something that's a broad problem in terms of foreign governments trying to influence our election process or even our corporate process. You could look at China, you could look at Russia. They feel like this has the tentacles that seem to be heading in the direction of the president and his people.
You know, one of the downsides of being a prosecutor is you don't get to defend yourself very often. I mean, Bob Mueller's never had a press conference. He's never issued a statement correcting a newspaper article that guessed at what he was doing. So executive branch investigations have that limitation. There have been 2 guilty pleas. There are 2 other indictments.
Do you feel that those guilty pleas implicate the president or the campaign in any way?
No. And I think that, no offense to the media, but I think the media is hyper-focused on how does this impact Donald Trump, and I think Bob Mueller is hyper-focused on where are the facts taking me. And I mean, I get that President Trump is really interesting from a news standpoint, and lots of reporters and writers are fascinated with whether or not Mueller's going to interview Trump and whether or not anything related to the president they're super interested in. I can just tell you, having done it for a living, Bob Mueller is every bit as interested in figuring out how we missed the signs that Russia was trying to interfere with our election. Prosecutors are just wired differently from politicians.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there would be a Bob Mueller special counsel investigation if Hillary Clinton were president right now?
Heavens no, because Attorney General Adam Schiff would never investigate it nor appoint special counsel. But I mean, one of the reasons I can't wait to go into another line of work is the relativism that we don't apply the same standard. that Democrats will wail and cry and gnash teeth over something they think Republicans have done, and they're more than happy to turn a blind eye if their own team does it. So there's not a snowball chance in purgatory that Attorney General Adam Schiff or Attorney General Loretta Lynch would be looking into a similar fact pattern with Secretary Clinton. I mean, President Obama absolved her of any criminality in her most recent probe before the investigation was over.
Well, there are some who believe that there may have been a Russian attempt to influence both sides of the campaign, and that may be where the State Department investigation is going, this foreign source who's sending information to Christopher Steele, that they were, sort of entertained at the notion of coming at perhaps both campaigns. Is that side being investigated enough in this equation, do you think?
It is by Congress, and I cannot speak to special counsel. No. I'm not supposed to know what he's doing, and I don't know what he's doing. But I can tell you, over the strenuous objections of my Democrat colleagues, we did find out that Chris Steele was relying on Russian subsources. So, in essence, the Democrat National Committee and Hillary Clinton were spending money to acquire information from Russian sources to then be used to interfere with or influence or impact the 2016 election. It is an irony that you couldn't make up if you wanted to. I just have been unsuccessful at getting many elements of the mainstream media to be interested in that half of the equation.
Do you think that President Trump can get a fair hearing in this process?
I do. In the court of public opinion or through special counsel?
Through the special counsel, for starters.
I do. I think Bob Mueller is a former United States attorney and a former FBI director who has had an otherwise really distinguished legal career, and I don't know any prosecutor. I mean, first of all, you either have the facts or you don't have the facts. Mm-hmm. So even if a prosecutor wanted to, quote, get someone, you got to have the facts to do it. I mean, we have a jury and a judge standing between a overzealous prosecutor and any defendant.
But we've seen special counsels in the past leave their purview, and the investigation has gone on for a long time, and the next thing you know, you're investigating a Monica Lewinsky case when the president didn't even know her when the special counsel began his work. So you don't have any fear of that here? Because of the people involved?
Do I have fear that jurisdiction may wander a bit? I think it already has. It's already wandered a little bit, but I would not blame Bob Mueller. I would blame whoever drafted the jurisdiction and the charter that empowered him. And if you look at it, it says matters that may arise from the investigation. What in the heck does that mean? I mean, is that a bank robbery in Topeka, Kansas?
And that language came from Rod Rosenstein?
Yes, ma'am.